Eastman Johnson was an American painter in the 19th century. If you're thinking, I've never heard that name before in my life, no worries, no one was paying attention to American painters in the 19th century. It is not your fault. If you're thinking, geez, I know that name, you might know it as one of the names on the entrance of, cue angelic music, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Because he is a co-founder of that amazing establishment and also one of America's most important artists. But I'm not going to be talking about the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Instead, I need to take you all on a little trip to Duluth, Minnesota, to the Tweed Museum of Art, which is the home of a particular group of obscure paintings by Eastman Johnson. A particular group of paintings of a particular group of people. This is the Ojibwe Tribe. Eastman Johnson was born in 1824, and by 1856 he was already an established artist. He had done portraits of the likes of former President John Quincy Adams. He studied the 17th century Dutch masters while living in The Hague. But 1856 was the year that he went to visit his sister on Lake Superior on the western frontier of Wisconsin. Yes, once upon a time, Wisconsin was a western frontier. While in Wisconsin, Johnson became acquainted with a guide named Stephen Bonga. Bonga traveled with Johnson all around the area. And it was through Stephen Bonga that Eastman Johnson became acquainted with the Ojibwe tribe. Bonga was half Ojibwe, half Black. And Johnson's acquaintanceship with Bonga, as well as his acquaintanceship with Bonga's Ojibwe wife and mother, seem to have been formidable, because suddenly Eastman Johnson becomes very interested in painting the Ojibwe. Today, the Ojibwe people are one of the most numerous indigenous peoples north of the Rio Grande, coming in at a population today of around 170,000. They historically live near the northern border of the United States and Canada in the Great Lakes region. They're traditionally known for birch canoes, the mining of copper, and cultivation of wild rice and maple syrup. So for 2 years, Eastman Johnson painted the Ojibwe. Hold on. You're probably wondering why I don't have a specific Ojibwe person to talk about. Usually I pick one individual model to discuss, not a whole group. Remember when I said Johnson studied the Dutch masters in The Hague? He's actually sometimes referred to as American Rembrandt, which is to say he's just like Rembrandt, but American, so who cares? But if you watch my episode on Girl with a Pearl Earring, you may realize that this means Eastman Johnson was doing genre painting, which is a type of painting established by the Dutch in the 17th century. Artists who do genre paintings are painting scenes from life, often rural or peasant life. And they aren't in the habit of telling you who the people in the paintings are, because you're just supposed to see the people as part of the scene. That is very annoying for me with these particular pieces of the Ojibwe tribe. Don't you just want to know who these faces are? Instead, I'll just have to satisfy myself by giving you a little more context about who the Ojibwe are. So, in and before the time Eastman Johnson is doing these paintings, they lived in sedentary groups called bands, hunting, fishing, growing corn and squash. They lived in wigwams, as detailed in this painting by Eastman Johnson. The walls of that structure are made of birch bark, birch was very important. In addition to a rich oral history, they developed a form of pictorial writing done on rocks and also scrolls made of birch. By the time Eastman Johnson is painting the Ojibwe in 1856 and 1857, the tribe had already had a time with white settlers. They had allied with the French against the British in the 7 Years' War, but the French lost that war in 1763. So the Ojibwe allied themselves with the British against the little baby United States of America in the War of 1812. The Ojibwe hoped the Brits could help push back these new white settlers who were kind of encroaching on their land. So after that war, the fledgling child that was the United States tried to forcibly remove all the Ojibwe from their home to Minnesota, west of the Mississippi. Brand new baby United States, land of the free, home of the brave. Literally the first thing we did was kick someone else out of their home. We don't talk nearly enough in this country about how bad we messed up. Only a few years before Eastman Johnson was making these striking paintings, the Sandy Lake tragedy happened. This is an event in American history in which our government tried to shelter the indigenous people they were relocating west of the Mississippi at Sandy Lake, Minnesota for the winter. The lack of funding and supplies resulted in the death of 400 Ojibwe, which at that time was 12% of the tribe, due to illness, starvation, and cold. It was this event, however, that shocked the public into fighting for allowing the bands to stay in their native lands. And that's why Eastman Johnson was able to paint them 6 years later in 1856. What happened to Eastman Johnson after 2 years painting the Ojibwe? He was fundamentally changed as an artist. The American Civil War over the legality of owning slaves began only a few years later in 1861. And Eastman Johnson began cataloging faces and scenes of the American Civil War with honesty and humanity. He became an extremely important figure in capturing the African American experience during the age of slavery. And some historians think it was Eastman Johnson's time with Stephen Bonga and his family, his time painting the Ojibwe, that gave him the interest and empathy to paint other Americans of color in a time when the country was intrinsically against them.